Director of the Madison Public Library Foundation. I'm actually here at Central Library today. I am in a study room, so I can be mask-free. I'm on the second floor in study room 201. And behind me is the Aaron Borod mural. So many of you who knew the 1966 Central Library building know that we have a very famous mural that used to be in the children's room, and now part of it is in the study room as well. So it's nice to be at the library, and thank you for joining us here today at our educational workshop series. So we've been offering these educational workshops as a way to reach out to our donors and thank them for supporting us and to provide content that hopefully is helpful to all of you. We actually read the surveys really closely, and the topic that we're doing today on long-term care is something that was actually suggested in our survey results. So enough of you suggested it that we decided to put together the panel that we have here today. So thank you so much for joining us. As you may have seen in the screens that we're rolling through, we do have a fundraising event coming up that I just want to mention. The author Carl Hyacin, who is a mystery writer from Miami and also a journalist from Miami, will be joining us for Lunch for Libraries. It's a virtual event. It's on May 25th. And proceeds from that event support our Wisconsin Book Festival as well as literacy programs here at Madison Public Library. We also hope that we will be open to the public very soon, as so many people are getting vaccinated, and as kind of the public health is determined that our county is doing a lot better. We hope that the library board, when they meet again in May, will vote to reopen the libraries at the end of May. So we hope to see so many of you back here at our 9 Madison Public Libraries very soon. So now it's my chance to introduce the moderator of our panel, a wonderful volunteer of ours, Meg Prestigiacomo. So she has been volunteering with Madison Public Library Foundation for a number of years on our donor development committee, as well as on our planned giving committee. She is a senior vice president and financial advisor at Prestigiacomo Carroll Group that is part of the Baird Group. So I'm so happy to welcome Meg as our moderator, and she will introduce our panelists as well. Thank you, Meg, for being here today.
Thank you very much, Jenny. It's a privilege to be here today to be the moderator for our panel discussion on long-term care planning. As Jenny mentioned, I am a financial advisor and I work with many clients who are planning for retirement. And this topic of long-term care often comes up as many of us oftentimes are faced with caring for loved ones. And so this is certainly a topic that's near and dear to my heart. If you have questions throughout the presentation, you do have the opportunity to ask those questions. Please use the Q&A box located at the lower bottom right part of your screen. And I will do my best to ask the panelists as many questions as possible. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists today. Each of our panelists work in the area of long-term care planning. Our first is Meghan Teigen. Meghan Teigen is an attorney and partner at her law firm, Johnson Teigen. She practices in the area of estate planning, special needs planning, elder law, probate, and trust administration. She is a frequent speaker to individuals, families, professionals throughout Wisconsin on important issues related to estate planning, special needs trust, long-term care planning for older adults and individuals with disability. Welcome, Meghan. Our second panelist today is Reginald Hislop. Reginald Hislop is a CEO of Oakwood Village right here in Madison. He has been an executive and consultant in the healthcare and senior housing area for more than 35 years. In his career, he and the organizations that he has led have provided care and services for hundreds of thousands of older adults and their families. Lastly, we have Dale Kelcher. Dale Kelcher is a vice president at Neckerman Insurance here in Madison. His insurance specialties are business, life, long-term care, and disability insurance. He is also a lifelong Madison resident and agency campaign chair for United Way of Dane County. Welcome to Meghan, Reg, and Dale. Thank you all for being here today. So let's go ahead and get started. This first question is going to be for all of you. This is a question that I'm often asked, in particular when we're planning for our own retirement, but oftentimes this question comes up when we ourselves are caring for our own loved ones. The question is, when should people start thinking about long-term care? What does it look like at different ages? Maybe perhaps talk about during different ages what people should be thinking about with regard to planning for their own long-term care. And I'll throw it to Dale first.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for having us. What I would say is the earlier, the better. And if there's one thing that you can take away from today, it's if you have a need to protect savings assets with long-term care insurance coverage, you want to start as soon as you can or as early as you can, so you can qualify for a program. And I will tell you that as far as there's no magic age, but I would say the program, the insurance program, is based on age and health. The younger someone is, the lower the premium. And the younger someone, typically the healthier that they are to qualify for a program. So, 20 years ago, someone in their when they turned 65 after they got their Medicare supplement, they would set up a long-term care program. Now, especially in the last 5 years, we've seen the trend to younger and younger ages. Right around 50 years old, we're seeing most people do this planning as they've gone through taking care of their parents or seeing their parents go through spending down their money for care that was provided to them. So the earlier the better. I think as young as you can do your planning is beneficial.
That's great. I always say it's a good time to just start talking about it, having that conversation with people, whether you buy insurance or not, but just understanding what the future may or may not look like as we age. I'll throw it to Megan, if you want to address maybe what some things you can think about with regard to from the legal standpoint for planning.
Sure thing. So from a legal perspective, when we're talking about when's the appropriate time to start thinking about long-term care, like Dale had said, it's the earlier the better. And from our perspective, we're thinking about planning for incapacity, in addition to getting your legal documents in order as you start to plan for your own long-term care and planning for incapacity. Though our discussion today is probably going to take a more common view of long-term care, in that it's something that generally is that need to plan for at the later stage of life. Incapacity can happen at any age. So from our perspective, you want to establish a relationship with an attorney. I know, as unattractive as that might seem, a lot of attorneys are very nice and are very happy to work with you as you develop this plan. But the sooner you can do it, the better, just like Dale said. And what we're talking about, again, is getting your surrogate decision makers in place. And that's going to be your powers of attorney, both for healthcare and for finance. So you really want to make sure that you have that established so that you can save your loved ones a lot of difficult planning in the event that you had an unexpected event of incapacity. So establish that relationship early, and then know that once you have that plan in place, it's something you're going to have to maintain over time. Our good rule of thumb is to revisit your plan. We think of the 5 Ds every decade. In the event of a death in your family, if there is a divorce, a diagnosis, or if someone develops a disabling condition. So those are the times to revisit your long-term plan and your legal plan.
Great. Reg, what would you say, coming from the part of the taking care of people? What would your advice be to those?
I think Megan and Dale really kind of hit sort of the foundational pieces, and I agree 100%. One of the pieces though that I think folk need to really start with as well is, how do they see their future and what are their core values? Because I've had lots of conversations with folks where there's a fairly large disconnect between what they think is going to happen and what the logical kind of outcomes are. And, it's like, why? Because I've had people say to me, well, I'll never go into a nursing home. Well, let's kind of back up from that a little bit. Let's think about how that might mechanically happen, but then let's also place into context, if you're not going to do that and you want to live at home, or you want to, like a lot of folks say to me, I want to die at home, etc. That's a different kind of a plan financially and other than some of the other options. I think folks sometimes don't really have a good comprehensive understanding among their children and themselves about what that future looks like, what retirement looks like, how they're going to live that out, where they want to live. do they want to continue to live in the same community? Is there a relocation, kids, other things like that? And it's an iterative process. So you start the dialogue, and the earlier you can do that, especially as you sort of get to the age I am, right? So I'm still working, obviously. My kids are now grown, they're out of the house, and we've had lots of conversations about where mom and dad are headed and what that's going to look like. So that gives them a really good frame of reference in what we're planning to do. And of course, I always tell them, do expect nothing in the will. There won't happen. I intend to blow it all before, that last day comes.
Thank you, Reg. That's a really good point. I would say that, we always used to think we're going to retire, we're going to live this, great life, perhaps sitting on a beach, and then, we get old and we end up in a nursing home. And that, obviously isn't the case for most of us. And so there's lots of options, as you inferred. And so can you talk about, how do retirement communities fit into this picture for planning? And, I think one of the other questions that we often get is, do we have to get on a waiting list? And where does the real utilization of care happen? Is it actually in nursing homes or assisted living facilities or home? And what are all those options?
Sure. So there's like three parts. So first of all,
Yeah.
if you have a preferred sort of destination, if you're at that point, and you want to live, for example, 5 years from now at an Oakwood, right? Yeah, it makes sense to have a conversation with somebody and look at what the waiting list options are and so on and so forth. But I tell folk all the time, don't go down a waiting list if you're really not serious. Because I've watched people kind of go through this multiple times over. Well, we're on the list, then they get called and they're not on the list. And some communities will dump you all the way back if you are on the list. And when your name is called, you don't move in. So you may go to the back of the line. So be sure about what you want to do. Retirement communities are not for everybody, okay? They have pluses and minuses, and there's a multitude of different options that are out there, different styles. The Oakwood communities are very congregate oriented, but there are also other communities that, folks think about, perhaps like Sun City, the Del Webb options that are not as congregate, okay? They're more condo style or individual home styles. They don't have a lot of direct services, where in Oakwood is very service intense. So it really depends kind of where you are in that journey, and the costs are all over the board, right? So you can have very high end, very expensive, you can have lower. I usually tell folks, that retirement communities are a great place for three things. One is certainty. You know exactly where you're going to get care and services from. You're going to have that priority. Two, you're going to have a social network. You're going to have a lot of people, your peers, your age group, and so on, that are going to be part of that network and things of that nature. And three, if you don't have active engagement, or your kids are really busy and other things like that, you do a really good thing for your children if they're spread out. Because you pre-planned and coordinated your care, in a centralized location, and the kids don't have to. The community does it for you. The kids don't have to. I thought there was one more about how folk use care. Nursing home is not the predominant place that I see people spend a lot of time in, right? The trajectory today is moving much more to home community-based services as folks need care. Preferably, they would like to receive that at home. And then we see folk go kind of into the assisted living sort of environment, where they can have much more of a residential flavor, less institutional, more kind of care options. But the danger with the assisted living environment that folk got to pay attention to is it can be very pricey. It can be as expensive or more expensive than nursing home care. And the options, the price points vary widely. So, that's a piece, again, that bears exploration and bears some thought, because it is not like homogeneous. They're all the same. They are not. Markedly different, especially if you need memory care, which can become very expensive. So, those are all pieces that you talk to people like Dale and Meghan about as you're going through your planning.
Great points. One of the other points I'll just address too is when you're, having that discussion when you're planning. I think as people look at what are the different options out there, the other thing that the other conversation I think is important to have is, are you close to your family members? Who is it going to be? I mean, physically, who is going to see, as you guys all see, that oftentimes family members are very involved with caring for them. And so retirement communities, I think, can be a really great option for people that maybe don't have family nearby. But just thinking that out as people start to plan for their retirement is, where do I want to be physically? I think is really important, and who's going to be that person that's going to be, helping me. Back to cost, which is obviously the other big question that we get with regard to cost. And obviously there's a range, Reg, as you covered, but can you talk about, that range? And I believe we're going to have some resources to send out to all of the panelists, but just what are some average costs that we can anticipate? All panelists are welcome to answer this question. And then the other one would be inflation. So with regard to healthcare costs, we all know that that's going up higher than average. And so when people are, if they're going to buy a policy, what would be a recommendation for inflation considerations?
So one of the things that I run into constantly throughout my career, and it's mostly because folk really don't plan for it as much as they probably should, or research as much as they probably should, is the whole notion of sticker shock. I'll have that conversation. This is the first conversation anybody's had with somebody about what's it going to cost. And when I tell them, you kind of see their jaw drop, or you hear, sort of a big exhale or something like that, because it is very, very expensive. There's the predominant methodology for paying for long-term care starts with one's own resources, and or insurance that they've purchased. When those run through, if you still need care, the next option becomes Medicaid. The difficulty is that you are really going to be looking at, if you want to live at home and you want to have care brought in, a couple of different options there. Is it medical care? Is it non-medical care? Is a mix of both? And you can very easily, if you need a lot of care, can be very easily looking at a price tag that exceeds assisted living or nursing home care. You can be talking about, thousands and thousands of dollars each month or more. Assisted living can range very easily between $5,000 and $10,000. You can get into the memory care side, and it can be even higher than that. The difficulty again is the stated price then is augmented by how many other services and care levels you need, and things of that nature. Nursing homes, you can figure on $8,000 to $10,000 a month easily. And again, it's going to vary in terms of who's paying for it, whether it's going to be Medicare first, and then what other things you need. Because again, the stated room and board rate is not the number. That's only a fraction of the number. The drugs and everything else and all the other services add on top of that. So, and housing can be anywhere from market to market plus.
So that's
I
the
wish
cost
I could
in
give
today's
everybody
dollars.
a clear answer, but there isn't. It's so varied.
So that's the cost in today's dollars. What do you foresee with inflation with these costs going forward?
I think you need to plan for, close to that 5% sort of number.
Inflation.
Yeah, inflation number. We've seen sort of the pandemic effect, if you will, is not normal. So price changes this year have not been consistent. A lot of folks have felt like they couldn't increase prices much, just simply because, again, where things have shaken out with the pandemic. But going forward, just in areas and communities like Madison, I think you need to be prepared to be thinking closer to 5, as opposed to 3. And a big part of that is just the fact that the largest cost inflation feature in these environments is labor cost.
Yeah.
And labor costs are, continuing to pressure up.
Yeah. So now that we put out there the cost, let's turn it over to Dale, which I'm sure many people are asking, how can I insure against these costs that I may or may not have down the road? And Dale, if you could talk about the different types of options that are out there for long-term care insurance.
Sure. One last comment on inflation, and Reg is spot on in terms of the cost that you would pay today for care certainly are not going to be the same in 5 years from now. Costs go up, medical costs go up. We all know that. If you feel long-term care coverage is right for your situation, you want to make sure that you include the inflation rider. 5% inflation rider, you can actually do a 3% inflation rider. A 5% inflation rider will increase your benefit 5% compounded every year. So in 15 years, when you first take out that policy, your benefit will double. So it creates a huge benefit down the road in making sure that it protects what you want to protect for the increased costs of care. As far as what can you do to protect yourself against long-term care stay, you can purchase a long-term care policy. You can set up a traditional policy that you set a benefit per month. You also select a benefit period. Do you feel a 4-year program is going to be enough? Do you feel that a 6-year program is going to be enough? You set up those features inside of a policy to protect your investments in your retirement income. As far as the different type of plans available out there, there's the traditional long-term care insurance policy, and there's also a long-term care policy option inside of a life insurance policy. They call it a hybrid policy. And that has become more and more popular the last few years as insurance companies have made a lot of changes as far as their offerings on traditional long-term care. It created an additional need where you could still provide yourself that protection that you need to protect your assets in your estate and still have some good solid coverage. So the advantages and disadvantages of each of the plans, right? So you have a traditional long-term care policy. That's going to be a lower cost to start with. The advantage is the lower cost. The hybrid policy, the advantage there is you can lock in your premiums. You can guarantee your premiums. You can actually even have it paid up for 10 or 15 years after you set it up, and then you don't have to worry about your rates going up. The disadvantage of a individual long-term care traditional policy is down the road, the insurance company could raise those rates on you. So then you have to make a decision at that point once those rates change, if they do. Another advantage to having a policy is you can have the policy to provide what they call an indemnity benefit. It pays you the benefit directly, and then you can choose how much you want to provide for that care, whether it's in the home or whether it's in a nursing home or whether it's an assisted living facility. Some of the policies out there that are available are reimbursement policies. The disadvantage there is you have to pay for the first month of care, get a receipt, and then get reimbursed from the insurance company. So the indemnity programs are a lot more popular. You can actually receive much higher benefit, typically if the costs are less. Reimbursement is up to the charges, where indemnity will pay you what you have selected on that long-term care policy. So there's some of those benefits. One of the benefits for both of the programs, the long-term care individual traditional policy versus the hybrid, you can deduct the premiums on your Wisconsin state tax return for the amount of the premium of the long-term care on both of those policies. So that's a small advantage to having a policy doing your part to kind of protect your estate.
Great, all great points, Dale. Also, how do you determine if you should insure or not?
So, it depends on your certain situation. If you're an individual that may have done very well saving and you have or inherited some money where you have $5 million worth of savings and retirement funds, that person, this may not be appropriate for you. You may be able to just pay for your stay or your care if that happens to you. Or if you're someone that has saved very little and you don't have a lot of assets, you may not need this program either. Most of us, majority of people out there, are right in the middle, where they may have up to 500,000 in retirement funds or investments, or up to $1 million, and they want to protect what they have. And in fact, most of them, like a lot of us, we want to pass it on to our children. If you have something to protect that you want to pass on and you want to have more choices, this may be for you in terms of a long-term care program. And oftentimes people will use investment income, interest income to pay the premiums on the plan to protect their estate.
So if someone if they think they want to buy insurance, when is the right time to buy it, and when is it too late to buy insurance?
Good question. Good question. So like I mentioned earlier, as far as the earliest possible, you can do your planning, right? So if you're looking at when do I purchase this, typically right around age 50, even age 4 in the 40s. If you feel you've done your planning already, would be good, as your premiums are a little bit lower at that point. And you're more apt to be able to qualify for a program at that point. So just to give you an idea, kind of the cost of a long-term care policy, generally speaking, you can get a good basic program at the age of 50 for right around $300 a month. If you're 60, that same program with the same benefits may be about $450 per month. And then those same benefits for someone age 70 may be $600 a month. So you can see, as you go from age 50 to age 70, your premium would double if you wait to age 70 to get it. So that's the impact of making sure you do your planning early. The other side is, can you qualify in your 70s? And over the years, I've had a number of people that have not been able to unfortunately qualify because they did their planning in their 70s or late 60s and they weren't able to qualify for a program. Now, many of our insurance companies will offer programs up to age 75 when you first start. So you can still get a program, it just might be a little more challenging.
Great. Dale, I know you and I have talked about how we've seen people buying younger and younger, and most often it's the case of they've experienced this within their own families. And so I know I've seen that a lot where, their grandfather maybe was in a nursing home and their grandmother took care of them. And people often say, I don't want to do that to my kids. And I think that's the other reason, long-term care, if you choose to insure, they can help to take some of that anxiety off too, of that potential caretaker. So it's very much a personal decision, obviously, as many of us, work through this within our own families. I'm going to turn it to a different topic, to Megan. Let's talk about the specific Medicaid qualifications. What should be considered when planning for long-term care?
Sure, and this is a really important component of this discussion, because as we've seen through the talk already, you can see what the costs are going to be for the potential need for long-term care. And when we meet with clients, we talk about there's really 3 primary ways to pay for that care, and that is, as we've discussed, paying privately, or what we say kind of self-insuring, just having a robust savings, having long-term care insurance, which some folks are able to do that, some folks aren't. And the third, if it's necessary, would be to potentially avail yourself of the Wisconsin Medicaid program. And that's a really big difference I'd want everyone to understand between Medicare and Medicaid, because they sound so similar. They're kind of words that we interchange with each other, but they're very different. So Medicare is an entitlement program. Some of you out there may be enrolled in it already, but that is a program that you are automatically enrolled to if you otherwise qualify for it, which most folks do at age 65. Medicaid, in contrast, is a means-tested government benefit program. And what that means is that you only qualify for Medicaid if you can meet both their physical requirements and, what's probably more important for this conversation, the financial eligibility requirements. So in just kind of a nutshell, what that means for an individual is that when they apply for Medicaid to cover their long-term care needs, which can be both in an institution like a nursing home or assisted living, or in the home with home and community-based services, for an individual, they will have to show that they have less than $2,000 in countable assets to their name. There's a lot of planning strategy that can go into in terms of what is a countable asset to meet that definition, and a lot of things folks can do prior to impoverishing themselves to that level to protect some resources for their extra needs they might have. But that's kind of it in a nutshell. So it's a program with some pretty strict requirements. For married couples, there's some unique planning that can be done to save some more assets and some certain assets that are considered exempt. The key takeaway I'd say for folks today is that Medicaid has very strict eligibility requirements. The necessity of Medicaid can come at different times in life. Sometimes we meet with folks where it's crisis planning and they will need to apply for Medicaid very soon. Sometimes we're meeting with folks and they just want to know information about the program and whether it's a fallback for them in the future for their long-term care needs. The things I tell folks is Medicaid is a very unpredictable program and it can limit your flexibility of choices. And so that's something to bear in mind too. It often, as I know we'll probably discuss today, going on Medicaid can often conflict with some of your other long-term objectives. And I think as Reg pointed out really at the beginning of this, that's a key part of this too, is what is your overall plan for yourself as you age, and knowing Medicaid could be an option. It's something that it's certainly worth understanding the rules. And my advice to everyone is to, if you would like to know more about those rules, is to find a professional to help you with that, because there is a lot of misinformation about the program, its eligibility, and some strategies that you might find out in your own personal resources on like the internet. So that's some intro information about the Medicaid program.
Great. And Megan, I know you touched on this. I just want to make sure we answer it if we didn't, but how can estate planning and long-term care planning objectives overlap and sometimes conflict?
Yeah, it's very difficult. And I think we've kind of a little bit touched on these issues where it can be a conflict between your desire to have this legacy inheritance for your family and your own needs. And so there can be a desire in some instances where folks would want to, if they can see on the horizon that they may need long-term care expenses, either they know that their health is deteriorating, or as the common example we've used, they've seen it in their own family and want to try to prevent against it. They may take it upon themselves to try to perhaps give away some of their estate during their life. There are some serious consequences to that we'd always want folks to probably talk with a professional about. One of those consequences is if that person does need Medicaid someday. Medicaid, as some of you might know, this term has a look back period where they will assess an enrollment or an eligibility penalty period if you've given away assets 5 years prior to needing to apply for Medicaid benefits. So that can sometimes come as a surprise for folks, especially in a crisis situation where they may have had an estate plan, they had planned this legacy, especially for things like family farms, the cabin up north. They had planned for this asset to remain in the family. So that is one area where your own needs can conflict with your estate plan. And so there are some things that families can do and plan if they have enough time to do it. So maybe going back to our first point, the earlier the better to start having these conversations with your family, to start engaging a team of professionals, both financial professionals like Meg and lawyers and insurance professionals, and getting information about these long-term care options out there, getting that team together and having time to do that planning can really help you try to, as best you can, balance your estate planning objectives, your legacy objectives with your own needs, whatever they might be.
Wonderful. So it all comes back to planning. So we've got some great questions here in the chat and a couple that were emailed to us. I'm going to go ahead and read off some of these questions. Some are very specific, so I'll kind of give a broad brush to it. But Someone had mentioned that their in-laws were older, age 89 and 85, and they're determined to stay in their home until they drag me out with my boots on. Any words of advice for them? Reg, I suspect this might be one that you might want to address.
Yeah, and I get that. I get that sentiment, and I hear that a lot. If that is really, really true, be prepared right now to start researching how much that's going to cost and how feasible that's going to be, and having a very honest conversation, because it is not. If they need help, it is not going to be an inexpensive journey. And then you've got the other problem where it may not even be, in some cases, feasible. The desire sometimes is not always matched. There's so much demand with the actual real supply that is available. There are so many folks that desire and wish and utilize a variety of different services, that the service providers that are available are limited. Staff availability is limited. There's some flaws with that as well. You're not going to see the same person over and over again. There's a lot of turnover in that industry, et cetera. So my advice is, A, research the cost, B, get realistic about how much of that can really occur under what set of circumstances, because it's very, very difficult to assume we never, ever have to, leave that environment potentially.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And come back to a plan, and who's going to do that? Who's going to be the person that's going to help you?
Right. And, some folks are fortunate enough that maybe in this circumstance, there is some other support systems, right? So there might be some family support. There might be some folk that can augment or serve to bridge some of the other inconsistencies, perhaps, of purchasing care if it's not readily available or it's more limited.
Mm-hmm.
Those all factor in.
Yeah, and I know there's some organizations here in town that help people with that, whether it's in-home assistance, cleaning, even taking, even getting healthcare advocates, taking them to doctor's appointments and all of that.
Right. There's a whole level, right? And that's the needs can be from great, where I need somebody basically to be with me most of the day to provide virtually all things for me, all the way down to, as you say, Meg, I can be at home, but I need, shopping assistance and, help around what we commonly call IADLs, instrumental activities of daily living, paying some bills, taking care of mail, other things like that. But I'm okay up to that, kind of point. And there are service providers out there for those.
So someone in the Q&A did ask about this. They said they don't have children. How about senior concierge services? So I assume that's what you're referring to. Is that the organizations that can help with that?
It can, and again, it depends on what that level is. So there are, some can do it for free or for modest cost. If it's more direct care involved, then you're talking about a different kind of a quotient.
Okay. All right, we've got some insurance questions in here. So Dale, I think these are probably best directed to you. What disqualifies you? I'm assuming they need from long-term care. I'm assuming they need long-term care insurance.
So some of the things, if there's a recent diagnosis of cancer, other illnesses, if you had a stroke recently, if you're currently using a wheelchair or a walker. So just if there's additional things that you need help with now already, you may not qualify. Medical conditions wise, typically it's a condition that has not gotten better that may prevent you from qualifying for a program.
Okay. More insurance. So I've heard about insolvency of long-term care insurance companies. What happens if the insurance company goes bankrupt or no longer will pay out for long-term care?
So Wisconsin has very, very strict rules for insurance companies and how much they set aside for reserves. So Wisconsin's a great state to live in terms of the insurance companies and what they require to provide in the policies. Certainly could happen. The best gauge is to make sure that they are at least A-rated, and then their history of how they pay out their claims. And actually, you can also look into their financials to see how they invest and are they conservative, making sure that they are solvent for the future.
Mhm. I can tell you, I know personally in our family, we dealt with this. An insurance company went bankrupt and they did still pay out. So, so it's a pleasant surprise. All right, so kind of with that same topic, and I think you touched on this, but someone mentioned that friends of theirs paid premiums for long-term care with a very reputable national insurance company for 20 years. 2 years ago, when they were in their late 60s, the company informed them their plan was being discontinued and that the company did not plan to offer long-term care insurance. They had no recourse. What can you suggest to avoid this scenario?
In terms of if they're going to pay on future claims, is that another question?
It sounds like that the company did not offer long-term care insurance anymore, that they were no longer offering it. They had no recourse.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not familiar.
Yeah, so what's happened the last few years with insurance companies that many of them have raised their rates, unfortunately, but what they do have to do, what they're required to do is give you an option if you want to continue the coverage. So they cannot cancel you unless they cancel a whole group of people that have that same policy. So there is choices available for the companies as far as if you want to continue with them.
Yeah, and I would say I've seen that quite a bit. There's been a lot of people getting letters saying their premiums are going to go up on their existing policy, but then you can get different options out there. And so what's your thoughts on that now? If you're buying a traditional long-term care policy, you know, as you mentioned, those rates could go up, right? Is it likely that their premiums will go up with a traditional policy?
What I would recommend doing when you work with your advisor is ask them if they can look into the rate increase history. If an insurance company has raised rates in the last 5 years, there's probably a good chance they will raise them again. If they have not raised their rates, then you can feel comfortable that they may not increase. That's not to say that they won't, but at least they don't have a history of doing that would be the best way to look at it.
Yeah. All right, here's some legal questions. What options are there for POA of finance, healthcare, etc.? I don't have a family member or a close friend where I'd want in these positions. Same for dealing with my will after my death. Megan?
Yep, sure. There's there's great options in Madison for what we call corporate fiduciaries. So corporate entities, often bank, wealth management departments that can step in and fill that role. They often, you know, will meet with clients and discuss their services. Many times they would want to take the assets under their management in order to have that relationship as a power of attorney or as maybe a trustee, an executor or personal representative of your will after you pass away. So there'd be some engagement during your life, which I think is a good thing for you to be comfortable with them before you may need their services. For a power of attorney for healthcare, it's a little bit more difficult to find a corporate entity to do that, but there are some private individuals who will service that, who also work as corporate guardians for individuals who need that assistance. So there are some options out there for you, certainly.
Great. Okay, Reg, I think this one's for you. What is the general supply of the different categories of long-term care facilities in the Madison area? Is the supply likely to keep up with the demand over the next 20 years?
It's good. It's actually a fairly competitive market, so we're a little oversupplied. The difficulty is there's again a wide range between quality and availability. So there's a lot on the assisted living side, pretty much all over town, and there's new building that gives folks a pretty good opportunity. Same way with independent housing at various sort of levels. More affordable housing options are tough, but that's every market. And nursing home is pretty good, but again, the very good ones can be a little more limited than not. When you get to the home health side and that, you know, that whole entity between licensed care and personal care and so on, that one's going to be, again, reasonably well supplied. but it's going to be difficult to access the consistency of staff and perhaps a lot of services, more episodic. And again, all of that has nothing to do with anything other than availability of staff in those environments. The demand is growing faster than there are workers to fill that need. So I think that's going to be the tight one for quite some time yet.
Yeah,
Okay.
if I can add real quick to what Reg said, because I think that leads into what a lot of families will do, that shortage of workers is that family will support each other. And oftentimes that will develop into a paid relationship, even if it's just compensating for some of the services they're providing. From the legal perspective, just want to always kind of share this information for folks. It's fine and it's very appropriate to do that. And often it's the most appropriate and best caregiver in some circumstances. But we'd advise that folks have a personal services contract with that worker, that they're cognizant of employer-employee issues and taxes and things like that. So it's just often a situation I run into with families where we may have to try to fix some issues that have happened in the past with paying family members for care services. So if you're going to go into that relationship, it's good to do it properly from the get-go.
Great. Several great questions coming in, so I want to get to as many as I can. All right. If assets run out during a stay in assisted/nursing home stay, will you have to leave and move to another place, or will Medicaid pay and allow you to stay? Reg?
Well, first of all, assets shouldn't run out and be a surprise. So, you should pretty much know where you're at and have communication with the facility, et cetera. It depends on where you're at, and it depends on what level of care you need. And not all providers will accept Medicaid. Not all providers will accept the assisted living version, the family care version. So there is some chance you may have to do that. Again, I encourage folks, if they're headed down that path, have a conversation with the community you're going to work with, or you're going to live at, the provider. Find out whether they do in fact take family care. Find out what their policy is, what's going on with respect to them. Are they participating in Medicaid? Most providers are, and what their sort of process is. And again, you should have, you can access decent counsel fairly inexpensively. If you're struggling a bit, make sure you do get good legal advice. The worst things I have ever seen is when people don't, and they end up in what I commonly call a black hole. And that is, I'm not Medicaid eligible, and yet I've got no money. I messed up. And that one can just be an absolute bloody nightmare. And I hate to see folks get there. Go see somebody like Meghan. If you can't afford it, there are other legal resources in town, but do it right. Don't mess it up.
Good point. All right, turning to insurance. Dale, this one's for you. How much have long-term care policies changed in terms of what they pay for? What is the best way to look for an insurance product that offers flexibility? For instance, can you use the money on or more than just the 5 primary activities of daily living? Does such a policy exist? Are those more costly than the standard long-term care policies?
Yes, great question. So why not just go back to the very first question that person asked about I believe their in-laws were 89 and they don't want to leave the house. When it comes to long-term care policies that are offered today in Wisconsin, Wisconsin is very strict. The Office of Commissioner is very strict on requiring insurance companies to offer certain levels of coverage and certain endorsements within that policy. So there's inside of that policy that you would purchase today, whether it's a hybrid policy or a traditional long-term care policy, there's a requirement to cover nursing home, assisted living, and home care. I think when most people think about long-term care, they first think of nursing home, right? And the vast majority of people, they want to stay in their home. Most of us want to stay as long as we can in the home. So that coverage is built in as well. So that's the benefit of having that policy. As far as what to look for, yes, there is. You want to make sure, if you want to use the benefit that you receive if you need care for things other than the caretaker or for the facility, the indemnity program is the way to go, because that will provide you the benefit. As long as you're receiving care, it'll be paid directly to you. You can use the money however you wish, as long as you continue to need care.
Okay. Do Wisconsin rules apply to long-term care insurance purchased in another state?
As far as if there's coverage provided in the state, most policies in the US that are sold cover other states in terms of the level of care. If you go to a different state, it will cover a care facility or home care agency in that other state.
Okay, great. I think we've got time for a couple more questions. Follow-up question about what to do for POA healthcare. If I don't have someone I want to do that, if I choose someone who does this as a career, how can I investigate and know that they will make decisions that I have discussed with them?
Sure. In my experience, when folks have gone this route, they will have the conversation before even the healthcare power of attorney form is executed, nominating that person, where that person has to agree to act as the agent. The other legal document that everyone should consider, and especially folks in this situation, would be an advance directive, a living will, where you clearly specify your wishes as they pertain to your care. So that's another option too.
Okay, great. All right, I think we'll wrap this up. There is another question that I wanted to mention was, what about aging and disability resource centers for free assistance in navigating long-term care support and services? I don't know if you have anything to add here. I know we will be sending out some material and some resources after this presentation, but did anyone else?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit. I can speak a little bit to that, Meg. When I first started in this field, I worked as one of the attorneys that supported the benefit specialists at the Aging and Disability Resource Center, which if you've never gotten resources from them, I encourage folks to take a look. It's a free to the community service for individuals over age 60 or individuals under age 60 with a disability. And they can provide information. In some circumstances, they can provide assistance. They do have attorneys that provide support for the benefit specialists there that can provide help to you in the community. The thing I'll add, though, is that the attorneys that work there cannot directly assist you in as an attorney-client relationship. So if your issue is very specific to you, or you need more proactive counseling, then you may need to look privately for legal assistance in that matter. But the resources you can obtain from the ADRCs is really wonderful.
Great. Wonderful. Well, I'll wrap it up unless anyone else had any other closing comments. Anything you were dying to say? Great. As I mentioned, we'll be sending out an email to all participants with some resources listed and some additional information. And we also will be sending out a survey to all of you. And as Jenny mentioned, we do read these. Please let us know if there's any topics that you have for us for future presentations. I am on the Donor Development Committee for the Madison Public Library Foundation, and part of our responsibility is to provide education to our donors and community members here in Madison. So we thank you all for being here. I thank Megan, Reginald, and Dale, everyone for your time today, very much appreciated. If you enjoyed today's presentation, please consider contributing to the Madison Public Library Foundation. Also, there's a great opportunity coming up, as Jenny mentioned, on May 25th. We have our 10th annual Lunch for Libraries, and we've got a great speaker and author, Carl Hyacin. He's a comic thriller writer from Florida, so we're very excited about that. The funds from this luncheon will be used to provide programming for the Wisconsin Book Festival, as well as youth literacy efforts throughout the year. So please check it out. And thank you all and have a wonderful day.